I'm here. So welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining. So let's just wait maybe a minute or so until we start. Wonderful to see people all over joining us here. So welcome everyone. Paul, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. I always like this bit. I like to see people as they come in and their different backgrounds. You get to be nosy and look at what people have got set up in there.
I thought that you're not that kind of person.
Oh no, I'm deeply nosy.
So are you one of those people who is going to kind of just walk by the streets and look into other people's windows?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because
Paul, they want privacy in their life, you know. It's not like about you fulfilling your, I don't know.
But they should put curtains up. That's my if
but
they've
sometimes
got a
they're kind of semi-transparent, the curtains. I mean, you can still look inside. It's like, it doesn't mean that you can or you should look inside.
They secretly want you to. I think that's what it is.
So I also one of those persons who is kind of going from one website to another and just picks inside of the view source, like source code and stuff.
Yeah, you see, look, if we're working, I'm a user experience designer, right? And so a fundamental part of my job is to understand people, understand how they think, what they do. The best
that doesn't mean stalking them.
Oh, yes, it does. Absolutely. It means I tell you what, the best usability testing I ever did was when I went into, instead of getting people to come to me, I went to them. I remember very vividly the first time this ever happened, where I went to their house rather than them coming into a studio. And it was totally transformative, because when you go into their house, if you go where someone is, you see who they are, right? You get a sense of their personality, their character. I remember going into one lady's house where she opened the front door to us and all these cats came out straight away, right? Ran around my legs and were off. And she was a stereotypical cat lady, right? Wherever you look in her house, there were all these cats, either real cats or little things on shelves and that kind of stuff.
To the usability thing.
It was fascinating looking around. But then when we sat down to do the usability testing, the first thing that happened is a cat jumped on her lap. So she was spending the whole time dealing with this cat while trying to use the computer. And that's the real world. That's usability testing, because that's what happens in the real world. So absolutely, you should be nosy about other people's houses. And I'm learning all kinds of things about Mark and what his kitchen's like and what he's currently cooking. So, that's all part of it. And
at this point, I just hope that you don't judge people as well.
Oh yes, I'm massively judgy.
Okay, Paul. Yeah. I think this conversation is going to end poorly in the end of it.
No,
I think, do you think that you're going to find new friends?
No, first of all, I'm massively judgy of that person that's got some stupid gnome type thing on their shelf. What's that there behind that bold guy? And it's like a gnome with a red hat on and a big beardy thing under it.
I think it's this.
Oh yeah, that one. Yeah, that guy looks weirdo.
He's very friendly. He's keeping me safe. He's a very trusted person, character, I would say. All right, at this point, we probably should be starting. This was not the start. By the way, everybody who's just joining us, this is not us speaking for like another half an hour. It's just Paul talking about his very surprising way of living, which we'll be talking about in a moment. But let's just start briefly by playing a little video, as we always do, and then we'll start, the show, I guess. Well, I didn't share, did I? I stopped sharing.
No, see, you weren't almost professional, but you didn't manage to pull it off.
Yeah, Paul, just keep going like this. Keep going like this. All right, let's do this.
You know what you're getting into when you invite me on.
All right, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining in. I'm very, very happy to host this. I don't know, is this an episode of Smashing Hour? I don't even know what to call it. I think Jaren will be able to help me with that. Just to have a guest joining us and have a conversation about things. It's not necessarily, if you know me and if you know Paul, that's for sure. It's not like I have an agenda. Like I have everything listed out and there are all the questions that I'm going to ask in that particular order. It's more like just we have a conversation and then you are the part of that conversation. So we're very much looking forward to your thoughts, to your questions, to your input, to whatever it is coming from you, right? And we're going to just bring up and have a conversation about things for the next hour. Paul.
Hello.
I do need to
I've been
introduce
better
you briefly.
behaved now.
Yes, that's wonderful. I do need to introduce you. And the one thing that I actually came up with, which I think is quite telling, right, is the fact that according to bookworld.com, which I would say is a very credible resource talking about your particular lifestyle and your particular career choices, you have over 25 years of advice on digital marketing and UX best practices. 25 years. Paul.
It's actually 27 now.
Oh, oof. So Paul, what was the weirdest thing you've learned in your career so far in all these 27 years? The most important, no, not the weirdest. Who wants to know about the weirdest? I would say the most significant or most important thing.
I would say the most important thing is technologies and design techniques come and go. But
Paul is here to stay. Is that what you're saying?
But soft skills will last forever. People don't change. Technology changes, but the fundamentals of human characteristics don't change. So the best thing you can do is improve your knowledge and your understanding of people, how they think, how they behave, and that makes you a better designer if you're a designer, but it also makes you a better team player. It makes you more capable of getting what you need done. So soft skills are by far the most important, and understanding and empathizing with people, which is why you should always look in people's windows when you walk past the house.
Okay, well, that explains everything, of course. I see a lot of very familiar faces in here. We have Marco joining in. Hello, Marco. And we have Lisa and Mark. Paul. Oh, Paul, I do know Paul. And a few other people. So welcome everyone. Wonderful to have you here. So Paul, tell us a little bit about, like, where are you at the moment? Doesn't seem to be your regular house routine. Something seems to have changed somehow.
You know
that
something has changed. That's true. So yes, I've recently become an empty nester, I think is the phrase. My child has gone off to university. And so the moment we got her out of the house, we have immediately run away. So we changed the locks, left the country, so she can't come back. No, we basically come to the States for the last 10 years or so. We have wanted to buy an RV over here so that we can go traveling around the States. So that's what we've done. We're actually picking it up this afternoon. And then we're just kind of spending probably 2-3 months at a time here in the States, doing traveling around while I work, and then 2-3 months at home where we do whatever, get on with life and sorting our act out, and then we come back out again and rinse and repeat. But the best time, this is a piece of advice I would like to give everybody, if you do have a dream to go traveling or make a big change in your life, the best time to do it is at the tail end of the pandemic and the beginning of a war. Absolutely the best time to make big life changes. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, well, I hope that these opportunities are not going to show up too often in our life. That would be very, very sad.
It would be a sad reflection on things, wouldn't it?
Indeed. So, Paul, in general, though, when we're speaking about your work, so UX-wise, what has been keeping you busy? So what were some of the projects that you worked on recently, or something that you've thought, oh, that was an interesting project where you got involved?
Actually, so that I'm going through a stage of doing some really interesting work at the moment. You know how it kind of ebbs and flows, doesn't it? Sometimes you get a load of boring.
Everybody does, of course.
Yeah, exactly. But at the moment, I've got some really good stuff. I'm doing a lot of work with conversion optimization at the moment. So I'm helping a lot of people, whether it be generate more leads, make more sales, whatever it is. I'm doing a lot of work in that area. and I absolutely love it. So I'm spending a lot of time doing prototyping, a lot of time taking existing sites and iterating them on to just improve their conversion rate, whether it be through changes to design, changes to copy. Sometimes it's performance-based issues, whatever it takes. And I love doing that kind of work. So I've been doing a lot of prototyping and a lot of testing at the moment, which has been a lot of fun. It's my favorite thing to do.
That sounds great, because from what I know, it's actually very interesting. I think that of all the people that I know, you have this very particular, I wouldn't say path, but you have this thing about you. So everything that you do, it's very much user-centric, but it's not just user-centric. It's not just about UX. It's more about really driving business forward by improving UX. Not like, not trying to trick people into something, not trying to use psychology in some way, but really trying to understand the customers to help businesses drive their decisions and get to better results, right?
Yeah, I mean, I actually do use psychology, a lot of it, but I don't there's this perception that if you use psychology, it's dark patterns, right? And the two are not the same. One doesn't equal the other. So, for example, a really big thing in psychology is cognitive load, that most of the time when we're interacting with a website, we're not giving it our full attention because we might have that metaphorical cat on our lap, or whatever that's going on around us, or we're distracted, or in Mark's case, cooking or washing up, I think he's doing now. And there's all these different things that are going on in our world, And so when we use a website, we're not paying it our full attention. And so even little things that don't quite work on the website or aren't quite right, basically create cognitive overload. So we need to design with that in mind. So that's psychology. You need to understand what cognitive load is, how it's overwhelmed, what impact it has. So not all psychology is bad psychology. It really, the whole thing with dark patterns, I think a lot of people argue against dark patterns from a kind of ethical standpoint, right? And that's perfectly legitimate. But the trouble is that I think the more telling reason to avoid dark patterns is actually from a business perspective, that it creates, buyer's remorse, and and that can damage your brand, and people, it's very easy for people to badmouth you.
Absolutely. There are also plenty of research telling that essentially whenever you're doing something suboptimal, where you kind of end up with a disgruntled or an unhappy customer, it's going to take you a lot of time to bring them back, if you even can achieve that in the first place. So this is actually very, very expensive indeed.
And it's a lot more expensive to acquire a new customer than it is to keep
an existing customer. Yeah, exactly.
And on top of that, there's also, let's say, a classic example is I worked with a client that was selling consumer goods, and one of their biggest sellers was a kettle. I know, exciting, eh? What an exciting rock and roll world!
Don't underestimate kettles.
Kettles are important.
I'm not even joking, because sorry for the little bit of an off topic here, but I just went to the barista course and they told me all about the importance of kettles. So kettles are seriously important. And
you went on a barista's course? Are you changing career, Vitaly?
Because, look at me, I even have a printer now. So this is how things have changed. And one of the most important things for those of you, does anybody who is joining us today loves coffee? Love coffee? Paul, sorry for hijacking your answer. No. Anybody loves coffee? We have a few people. Well, if you want to improve the quality of your coffee, there are two things you can do, and they're pretty easy, actually. First, invest in a good kettle.
Don't get Vitaly to make you a coffee.
I would be surprised. It's going to be difficult to make me go to a barista nearby to make a coffee. I'm getting pretty good at this. So the first thing is a kettle.
Right.
The second thing is water. You need to improve the quality of your water, and that means
you went on a course. You went on a course to learn that. I could have told you that.
Well, maybe we should talk a bit more like this, right? But essentially, kettles are seriously important. Please continue now.
Where do you go from that? Okay,
To
so
kettles,
anyway,
right?
the story of the kettle is that one of their biggest sellers was the kettle. And this particular kettle had a water filter that,
Very
that you
good.
could add
This is
to
what
it.
you need as
Yeah.
well.
See,
Yeah.
Vitaly approves of this. But what they decided they wanted to increase their average order value. You know, somebody in senior management made this decision. So what they started to do is they did, I think it's called bait and switch, where they basically, when someone bought the kettle, they bundled into their shopping cart the filters as well, right? Without asking people whether they wanted the filters. And obviously, on-brand filters were always more expensive. And sure enough, their average order value shot up, and the ecom team was very happy and they'd achieved their results. What they didn't know was unsurprisingly, they were pissing people off who were then calling the call center. Every call to the call center cost about £3.69 or something like that. And then they were getting the filters returned from these disgruntled customers that then had to be restocked by the stock team. And I worked out it was actually costing them as a business more money, right, than they were making by bundling the filters in. So things like that happen all the time because people don't communicate properly.
Yeah, I think it's also sorry to interrupt you, but at this point I feel like also many companies just don't get this holistic overview of everything. So they essentially track one particular metric, and that would be conversion most of the time, but then all the costs that are associated with, be it marketing, be it returns, be it customer support, and all the things are usually kind of just something out there, but the conversion is the most important part. So that's you're absolutely right. It's happened to me as well.
It's why you need to have a balanced set of metrics to be measuring.
Exactly.
And not I always like I try and have metrics in 3 key areas. So I'll have obviously conversion metrics, and there's loads of different things that you can measure depending on what you're wanting to improve. But I won't, if you just have conversion metrics, that leads to dark patterns inevitably. But if you balance that with engagement metrics and usability metrics, and you take all 3 together, then you end up with a much more balanced mix that leads to better results. But any metric, to some degree, you've got to hold it with a light touch and not get too obsessed with it, because it ultimately doesn't do you too much good.
Yeah, so I had actually a conversation just today because I also work on another project, very huge project, actually European Parliament now.
I've done some work with them.
Yeah. So navigation stuff and so on. That's really massive, actually. And one thing that's kind of interesting is, very often when we think about metrics, we kind of want to be able to argue that the work that we have done is better than what we had before, that we're kind of moving forward. With usability, you can always run some studies, you can run some usability interviews and kind of record some sessions and things like that. But what I see also many companies introducing now, this notion of design KPIs, where essentially you try to really establish design related metrics. For example, for web forms, it could be just a combination of things like error recovery, completion time, the complexity of the form, however you define it, and all of that. And so what I see a lot of people really now struggling, because on the one hand we have these KPIs, but then where is the soul of design? Aren't you kind of supposed to be artistic? And then there are things like feelings that you want to elicit with your design as well, if it's let's say a landing page.
But you can test those.
Yeah, you could test those, but it's really hard to say, like, let's establish some design KPIs specifically for, I don't know, how, error recovery, like how would it work on a landing page, right?
Oh, easy peasy. I don't have separate design KPIs from just normal KPIs. In my head, design isn't this separate thing. Design is integrated into the whole of the business. So my set.
Oh, I think that Paul just froze, as it sometimes happens. Or is it just me? Jaren, is it me? Or is it no?
KPIs things like the system usability scale, which is, am I still with you?
I can, you're back now.
Okay.
Well, you're gone for like 10 seconds, 5-10 seconds.
Yeah. So with those three areas, conversion, engagement, usability, you can do things like system usability scale, which is one. You can do things like time to complete task, numbers of errors made. There's a great tool called Maze, if you're familiar with Maze, that is really good for doing that kind of automated checking. So that's the usability side of things. Conversion, we've already talked about. Then there's engagement. Now, engagement, what you're talking about there is more what you were saying about the touchy-feely kind of emotional side of it. How invested are people in this? Now, there's some basic testing you can do around that in terms of things like your dwell time, amount of a video watched, those kinds of things. But you can also do something, and this is one that I almost always use, which is a semantic differential survey, right? Very pretentious word for a very simple thing. So let's imagine at the beginning of a project, you're looking at brand and look and feel and that kind of thing. Start off by agreeing with your client or stakeholders, what are the feelings we want to elicit in people, right? Do we want them to be excited by it? Do we want them to be, see you as professional or friendly or whatever those words are? And then you go ahead and do your design. Now you can run a semantic differential survey. And there are lots of different ways of running those. But basically what it boils down to is you show them a group of users the design, and you say, on a scale of 1 to 5, how strongly do you agree with this statement? This design is friendly or professional or whatever else. Another way you could do it is to put your design alongside your competitors and go select the design you find most friendly. And so you can certainly do that. And I often, in fact, almost always do that test for one very simple reason, that it shuts clients up. When clients turn around and they go, it doesn't pop. Well, what does that mean? Or, I'm not sure about this design, or, it doesn't feel very friendly to me. If you can provide solid evidence that the design has performed like that with the target audience, not only does it get you design sign off, but also it moves the conversation away from the client's personal opinions about the design to actually the user's opinions, which is obviously what ultimately matters. And to do a semantic differential survey, a couple of hours worth of work tops. It's very, very lightweight.
Oh, that's very useful. Actually, I didn't know that last one. That's very cool to see that. Actually, when you think about maybe we also had some things about that coming up in the chat. When you think about the tooling, so you mentioned Maze being one of them that you use a lot. Can you recommend any other tools for prototyping and just in general what you just fell in love with recently or that you use all the time?
Cool.
Yeah. Or maybe even share the screen if you have them. Just so people can see them.
I can do, actually. That's a really good idea, because there's one tool that is a natural carry on from what we were just saying about getting clients' approval on stuff, right? So how clients sometimes net promoter score. There's a whole conversation to have around that, but I'll come back to that in a minute. How clients say things like, make my logo bigger as the classic example, or make sure all of this content's above the fold, or whatever else, right? Which is an underlying way of them saying, I'm worried that people aren't going to see this thing, right? Now, the super expensive way of answering that is to do an eye tracking study, right? But of course, eye tracking studies, there are some tools now that make it a lot easier. There's a tool called Real Eye, which basically can just use your webcam and track people using the webcam. So it's got a lot cheaper than it used to be, but even so, it takes time and all of the rest of it. But there is a tool that I now use lots. Let me just bring it up on screen. I'll share my screen. And it's called Attention Insights. I pay $19 a month for this tool, and it is the best $19 I have ever spent. So basically what this is doing is it's taking hours and hours of thousands of hours of eye tracking studies and then creating a machine learning algorithm predicting where people will look on a page, right? And so what it does then is provide you with a heat map. So I'll show you something. I probably shouldn't show you this. I suspect it's probably under NDA or something, but shh, don't tell anyone. Right, so here's I've been working on a pricing table at the moment, and you can see how basically I've run it through this algorithm, and it's made predictions about where people are looking and how much attention is in any particular place. So I can just draw a box around that, for example, and it will calculate the attention that's given to it. So 38% of the attention is going to that particular element. Now, it's not 100% accurate, but it is giving you some compelling evidence to say that, yes, people are going to see that logo, so we don't need to make it bigger, or it doesn't matter that this thing is below the fold, it is still getting seen. And I use it all the time. And it basically kills off all of these endless debates straight away. In fact, the combination of that tool and this doing the semantic differential survey, when I use those two tools together, I never get any kind of design revisions. I don't get stuck in iteration hell. It just does not happen.
That's impressive. That's great.
And actually, sorry, this is a little bit of a plug. I'll fully admit this, but I actually, from when I don't know what I was doing with you previously, but I did something or other, and I actually encouraged people to sign up to my newsletter, and I created a page especially for Smashing Magazine. And actually, the giveaway on that is a course that talks about how to get design sign-off. So if you are interested in that, you can get that free course there. Mine is in English. Would it be your settings? The reason that particular project they do in French and Dutch. But it makes no difference. In actual fact, the language doesn't really have an effect on the eye tracking study anyway, because it's not about the language. It's about how our eyes scan the page. It probably would break down. It would probably break down on something like if you were doing a language that was right to left or something like that. It probably doesn't work on that, although I've not done anything like that recently, so I couldn't tell you for sure. So yeah, that's one of my favorite tools. Another tool that I've recently discovered, and I'm kind of embarrassed I haven't really looked at this tool before, is Framer. Have you ever had a go with Framer?
Heard of it 1,000 times, but frankly never use it on my own.
Yes, exactly the same with me, Vitaly. But I actually, so I wanted, I've got a couple of jobs on at the moment where we want to compare the oh, come on, spit out, Paul. The old version, the existing live site with a new prototype. We want to do a direct comparison to the two between the two. And both of them are, I'm doing a lot of insurance companies at the moment for whatever reason. Both are effectively checkout processes or getting a quote process, right? And so the problem that you have if you just do it in something like Figma is you can't do a direct comparison, because in Figma, you can't type in all your details and that kind of stuff. In Framer, you can. All of the input elements are interactive, right? And on top of that, Framer also lets you easily import stuff from Figma. So I had it mocked up in Figma and just moved it across. So that was great. But also it's much more, it works much more like an actual site works. So things like it handles responsiveness much better than Figma or those kinds of things. So I'm not saying dump Figma and go with Framer. What I am saying is if you've got to produce high fidelity prototypes that very closely match a live experience, then it's definitely worth checking out. It's really good.
Excellent. That sounds great. From my end, there is one that I discovered recently. I'm not sure if I actually showed it already, but I was seriously impressed when I saw it. And I use it now all the time as well. And that's called Pastel or usepastel.com. Do you know that one, Paul?
I heard of it, but again, I haven't actually tried it. What's it do?
Yeah, so essentially this is a very simple tool. There is nothing kind of magical around that. But what you can do is essentially this. You just plug in an URL. And when you do, it kind of creates this overlay around it, right? And what people can do is, let me move this around so I can see this too. So people can just add comments and you can give tags or assign tags to comments. You can give them process, can sort them by page. And as you go from one page to the next, it follows it. So essentially you just give them one URL and they go to whatever page they want. And it always takes a screenshot. So when I'm here, it also gives you this insights about the machine and the screenshot where people actually added a comment. So essentially just give them a URL of the entire page.
So it sounds like a really good tool for like support and bug tracking and feedback.
That's exactly right. So because you get to, you can also map it. That's a nice thing as well, because you can say, okay, now I have another version and you want to ping all the people to take a look. Right. And it creates this overlay on top as well. And you have different states and, and it's also fully responsive, by the way. Right. So it's really kind of more when you said that it's kind of operates like the real website. That's exactly the same thing here. And you also get all the, little things like searching through comments, and things like that, which I really like.
So the actual URL that's gone in there, that's a live web page.
Yes.
Not that URL. Okay.
But you can just go ahead, change the text and assign it and maybe even attach something to it and so on and so forth. That's pretty cool. I mean, this has been great for me, especially when you want to make sure that, instead of saying, hey, provide some feedback and give us some information, and then people start sending an email or Google Doc of things, it's just all here and then you check it off and then you're basically done with this and move to the next version. I love it. Absolutely love it. That's really, really nice as well.
Yeah, really useful. Like that one a lot.
All right. Okay, that's me sharing from my end. Anybody else has maybe another tool that they found useful? Please write in the chat as well. We always like your input, of course, as well. All right, now I lost my notes that I had somewhere because I started playing with something.
I spent half my life getting completely swallowed by tools. I've got a serious problem.
Oh, do you?
I could spend hours playing with every new tool that comes along. Oh, shiny! I'm gonna have a go with that.
Exactly. Well, okay, maybe moving to a slightly different topic as well.
Sure.
I think that if I'm not mistaken, we had Lukasz having a question, if I'm not mistaken, because the hand was raised. If not, that's fine. But you can also just speak up if you have a question, Lukasz.
No, sorry. It was about the before.
Okay.
No worries.
No worries. All right. Well, now that you're speaking that you are dealing with clients. Okay. Well, there's a question that came from Jerome. Maybe I should actually just go ahead and ask that one first.
No, that's a good question.
Yeah. So what do you think about coding prototypes in HTML and CSS?
Yeah, I mean, Jerome, that is often my preference, if I'm honest with you. Because it saves rework, basically. That, if you created the HTML and CSS, then that could be reused actually during the development. The only reason I didn't, and I used Framer on that particular version, is because we are still quite unsure of whether it's the right approach. And obviously producing it in HTML and CSS is going to take a little bit longer than it would do. And also it's going to end up being integrated into a headless CMS with, existing code. And it was just quicker to do it in Framer. But in principle, yeah, absolutely. Do it in the real environment, get it as close to the real reality as you can when you can.
Yeah. Yeah, from my end, it's been funny because just last month I had this conversation and I was really kind of pushing for coding prototypes. But then what happened was something that I didn't realize would become a problem, because when the code was written, it was not really accessible. It was just, oh, this is a prototype, right? So this is not going to be going to production and everything. But then once you see that this prototype seems to be working in tests and people kind of like it, this code actually did end up in production, and then it's being refactored, and then it's being kind of revised and changed. And this is kind of more a mentality thing. So we just need to be a bit careful, I guess, to make it very clear that this is not something we want to use for production. This is something we do for testing, right? There's a question from Jock, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. It depends is the answer to that.
So just because, sorry, Paul, just because some people will not be able to see the chat later.
Oh, sorry.
I'm just going to to read it up. Does Paul do all of his own user testing, or does he really rely upon agencies? If he conducts user testing, please provide details. Stages of testing, remote versus in person, reliability, confidence, for instance, doing wireframe prototype.
Wow, that's a big subject in itself.
Let's take
the first bit first. Sometimes I do my own testing, sometimes I don't. It will depend on basically the client's budget, what it is that we're testing, timescales, all of those things. I'm a pragmatist, all right, first and foremost. So I've got one client at the moment who are very, very risk averse. What we're talking about changing on their site is a big change. If it goes wrong, that is very bad. So in that situation, we're going to use an outside agency to do testing, someone called Experience UX that are specialize in testing. Because I think it needs somebody that is more experienced than me. I'm very much generalist. So there's that. And then secondly, it's never good to test your own work, is it? Because that always biases you. So that's the ideal. But in other situations, maybe the change isn't as big, maybe budgets are tight or whatever else. Yeah, absolutely. I would do testing myself. In terms of what type of testing I conduct, that very much depends on what the problem is. So let's take something like conversion rate optimization. The conversion rate optimization work I do has got a very particular process that I go through. So step one would be to diagnose where in the funnel people are dropping out. So where the problems are, and that's usually just Google Analytics. Then once I found the page that's the problem, we've got to identify the exact problem on the page. Now I start usually using things like heat maps and session recording using a tool like Hotjar, or if you want a free version, if you're too tight to pay for Hotjar, which I am, I use Microsoft Clarity instead, which is a free version of Hotjar and does pretty much a lot of the same things, not all of it. So sometimes that's enough. Sometimes you look at that and it's blindingly obvious what the problem is, and so you just stop at that point, right? But other times it's not so obvious what the problem is, and that's where I would do some facilitated usability testing in those situations where I want to actually see people working through the site and be able to ask them questions about their experience. So that's what I tend to do at that stage. Then once I've found what I think the problem is, then I've got to create a solution to it. Now, obviously, any solutions that I come up with are going to be guesses. So those are going to be tested. Now, depending on the level of the solution, you basically, solutions fall into two categories. One is very lightweight little changes, things like changing text, headings, images, that kind of thing. For that, normally I go straight for A/B testing, right? Because they're easy to roll out. You can do them easily in an A/B platform, job done, right? But then there's more substantial ones. Maybe you want to change the flow of pages or that kind of thing. That's what I'm working on at the moment. So in that case, that's where I would create a prototype, right? And if I want to test it against the existing site, that would need to be a high fidelity prototype. Once I produce that, then what I will do is different types of testing depending on budget and time, right? So for this big one that I'm doing at the moment, that's where we're going to go out and get a third-party agency. But other times I might just do some unfacilitated usability testing on it with a tool like Maze. And what that will give me is both session videos where I can watch back what users were doing, but also statistics on, you know, how long it took them to complete the task, how many mistakes they made in the journey, you know, those kinds of things. So the methodology that I use changes a little bit depending on what the exact situation is. If I'm doing facilitated testing, I tend to use a tool called lookback.io, I think it is, because that, I mean, you could do it over Zoom, obviously, but it just makes it a little bit easier using a tool called Lookback. Yeah, so that's a little bit about how I go about testing. I hope that answers the question.
That's great stuff. Maybe just one follow-up from my end, Paul. How do you then get users to test? Do you use some tools for that? Because some tools have kind of a user base which you can tap into, but you need to segment them. And do you prefer to go and just talk to actual users of that product? What do you do? And as a third question, what do you do if you just don't have a product yet and you don't have users yet?
Right. So take the third one's a bit of a weird one. We'll come back to that in a minute. Let's take, I can't even remember what the first two were, but I'll vaguely answer something. I don't listen to you, Vitaly. So in terms of recruitment, yeah, I mean, basically, I tend to, it depends on what I'm testing. Again, there are two types of things that you typically test. There are what I call usability testing, where you're testing, do people see the content? Can they interact with it? That kind of thing, right? And then there's, does it resonate with them? Okay. Now, with the first type, with the usability type, in actual fact, unless your audience is either the very elderly or the very young, or somebody with some form of accessibility or cognitive disability, something like that, most people behave in a fairly similar way. So in those situations, getting the right demographic is not as important as just getting eyeballs looking at it. So in those cases, if budgets are really tight, I literally throw it out onto my Twitter stream and ask people to look at it and play with it, right? If I want to be a bit more of a grown-up and slightly less cutting corners, then yes, Vitaly's right. Tools like Maze will actually recruit people for you for as little as $1 a person sometimes. So you know, it's not an expensive business at all. If I'm wanting to test the stuff, does it resonate? Right. So this is now a lot more emotional, a lot more about how, you know, people's kind of perceptions, their culture, their background, all of this kind of stuff. Then you need the correct audience. Now, you've got a couple of options there. There are agencies that will recruit people for you. Tends to get a little bit more expensive if you do that, or you can use your existing customer base. Now, the problem with using your existing customer base, of course, is that they're familiar with your existing process. So that can somewhat skew the results, and you just need to be aware that that's the case. So it is a lot harder to test when it comes to does it resonate and those kinds of things. In answer to Vitaly's spin-off random tangent question about if you've got no product to begin with, yeah, again, you are going to need to go out and find those people that potentially are going to buy that product or service. And a lot of people will avoid doing testing because they go, well, you know, we can't get those people. But if you can't get people to test your product, you're not going to be able to get people to buy your product. So I would really argue that one of the first things that you should be doing, maybe even before you start creating the product, is to create a landing page for that product where people can sign up to be involved in the creation process, right? And, you know, can be actively involved in that kind of thing and actually build up a mailing list of people potentially that you can call upon.
Yeah, that's very good insights. Thank you so much, Paul. There was also a question that came from Rachel a few minutes back, because you mentioned the Generalist And
Yes.
well, I mean, maybe that's also kind of opens another question that I also had in my mind too. In general, speaking about generalists, would you say that being a generalist really helps you to make a good career? Would you prefer to have, I don't know, to have deep dived into a particular topic, a particular niche at some point of your career and just become a very particular UX researcher, let's say?
Yeah.
Or would you say that it's probably better to be generalist and jack of all trades?
But it doesn't matter. Do whatever you want to do. I think there's a place for both of those within the industry, and you have to follow who you are. Sorry, that sounded really pretentious. Follow your inner bliss. You know. So I think everybody's different. There is a perception that you should specialize, which has been shoved down people's throats for a long length of time. And actually, I disagree with that. There's no reason why you have to specialize. If you want to, by all means, go for it. But in actual fact, there is a big need for generalists. There's big need for people that can speak as easily to a designer, as to a developer, as to a marketer, as to a SEO specialist, etc. So there is a need for generalists. And also, I would argue that if you want to be a user experience designer, you have to be a generalist. We use this word user experience and user interface interchangeably, but they really are not, right? They're radically different disciplines. A user interface designer is interested in the interface. A user experience designer is interested in the experience. Now, the experience encompasses everything from performance, how fast the site loads, SEO, how people got to the site in the first place, copywriting. You're interested in obviously interface design as well. You're interested in user research. You're interested in marketing. You're interested in psychology. All of these aspects make up the user experience. So I would argue that if you want to be a user experience designer, you have to be a generalist. You have to think holistically about things. And that's why I don't like it very much when you have UI/UX designer, as if these terms are in some way interchangeable, because it requires you to be both a specialist and a generalist, and nobody can be that.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. Well, I also see a few more things coming in the chat as well. One question was, Paul, do you use just pure HTML, CSS, or do you rely on WordPress, Drupal, etc.? I guess it probably depends on each project, right?
Yeah, are we talking about prototyping in that? Right, okay.
I guess.
Yeah. One little technique that I have started adopting. Normally, I've only ever done it with WordPress, but I don't see why it couldn't work with pretty much any content management system. Is basically creating your website in right, back up. People talk about minimal viable product, right? And in a minimal viable product or in agile development, you do the same thing. You take one work package at a time, don't you, basically? Which makes perfect sense from a developer point of view. But that's not great if from a designer and a copywriter point of view, right? The reason being is because we look holistically, right? So you can't just design one part of a site without considering the whole. So a thing that I've started to do on websites these days is, instead of doing work package, do levels of fidelity, right? Getting increasingly more higher fidelity as you go. So what does that mean in practice? I wrote an article on this. I'll probably dig it out, but I can't be bothered, so I'll just explain it. So effectively, what you're talking about is, when I start a project, the first thing I do is get a whole load of questions. What are the questions users want to get answered on this site? And then what I do is I normally do some kind of card sorting exercise in order to organize those questions into some kind of hierarchy, to give me my basic information architecture. And I'll use a tool like UX Metrics, which is an excellent tool and it's free at the moment anyway, at least, for doing card sorting. And so what that'll end up with is basically an information architecture with a load of bullet point questions. Now, at that point, I go straight into my content management system, right? And I will actually create all of those pages, and I'll just dump the bullet points in, right? And at this point, the content management system has no theme to it other than a very basic navigation along the top, you know, sub navigation down the side, and the default is basically HTML, right? So immediately then we've got something to test. Okay, we can test our information architecture with that. We can send people around it. Can you find where the answer to the question is? So you've got a very basic level of fidelity. Then, right, the content person can start bullet pointing out the answers to those questions on each of the pages, just very rough notes of bullets, you know, answering the questions. And while the designer can start adding some typography in, maybe doing some basic layout, that kind of thing. Then we've got something we can test again, right? Can people find the answer to the particular question that they've got, and what is that answer? And then we continue to refine it. The designer adds, you know, more layout and stylistic elements in there, basically designing in the browser as they go rather than in Figma or whatever else, while the copywriter starts putting in some draft content and stuff like that. Let me see if I can very quickly find the article where I cover this.
Yeah, it's interesting because actually I see this layered approach being used more and more. The way of how we do this actually, it's actually very similar to what you were proposing as well, is we try to create this information architecture, which essentially we have all these topics and tasks and whatever. You kind of group them with card sorting. And then what you do is essentially creating this task exercises where people are supposed to be able to find a particular piece of information. And we just test it by doing that. There is no design. There is no, I mean, not even a pixel has been put in HTML, CSS, or, you know, any kind of visual tool either. Oh, please go ahead, Paul. That's interesting, right?
Yeah. So this is, I wrote this article back in 2017, but it feels like this approach is only beginning to get some kind of momentum now. So this is what you'll end up with to start with, right? You know, basically it's a simple WordPress site. You've got your sub navigation, your main navigation, and there's basically on the accommodation page of this site, here are all of the questions that somebody wants answered, right? Simple as that. Bang, 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 bang. And that's all it starts off at. And then, you know, over time, you might start playing around with the layout a little bit. You might start introducing some typography. Now notice how the questions have got answers being associated with it, but only in bullet point form, right? And then you can start, and that's a terrible piece of design work, but anyway, you can start adding some more design elements in, you can start adding some draft content, and it allows you to test all the way through that process rather than it being, you know, testing in Figma and they throw it over the wall to the developer and then the developer throws it, you know, opens it up to create content. This means you can start getting content into your content management system on day one when you start the project. Because if you think about how most projects run, it's like, what's the bit that always stops you going live? You don't have the content in yet, right? Well, let's start putting the content in day one. Why not? You know? If you want to read that whole article, I'll just pop that in
link
there.
to it as well. Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. So maybe just because we have only 6 minutes left, talking about projects and talking about clients, I do have to bring this question because this always ends up with a very interesting conversation with Paul on that. So how do you convince clients about anything? Because you have a strategy of doing just that, I heard. Or maybe it's just rumors, I don't know.
No, well, you know I do. I've just submitted an article on this subject.
Exactly.
Please tell me you've at least read my article.
I did read your article, I would say, yes. So Paul, everybody wants to know. So how do you convince your clients or managers at this point to do what you strongly believe in?
Yeah. That's more than a 6-minute conversation.
I think you can make it, Paul.
But to give you the
work harder.
Yeah, to give you the highlighted version. I would. My daughter is insisting on calling me. How do I stop her? Go away! I don't love you anymore.
Paul, we're very
you've left
friendly
home. You're
people
on your
here.
own. Right. I'll call her back afterwards, honestly. What was it talking about? Yes. How do we convince clients? Basically, at the heart of it, lies. She's now calling my wife. This is so funny. Basically, at the heart of it lies the fact that we need to empathize with our stakeholders. We need to not see them as the enemy, not see them as the people that we need to convince, so much as we need to start understanding their needs, understanding what they have to achieve, and then frame what we do within that context. Jared Spall wrote a great article called How to Convince I can't convince an executive of anything, and neither can you. And the basic principle of what he was saying in that was that, look, forget talking to them about user experience, right? Nobody cares about user experience apart from you, right? If you're a developer, nobody cares about development but you, right? Instead, find out what those people already care about, right? Whether it be getting their end of year bonus, whether it be meeting a target, whether it be getting a promotion, whatever it is, and it show them how what you want to achieve will help them achieve what they want to achieve. So let's say you wanted to improve the user experience on a website, right? When you're talking to a marketer, you talk about how improved experience will increase word of mouth recommendation, right? When you're talking to the finance person, you talk about how doing user testing and user research means that you're less likely to build the wrong thing and reduce costs, right? Make project more successful. When you're talking to the customer acquisition team, you talk about how, good user experience increases customer retention. You've got to frame it in terms of what they care about. I've written a lot more on this in an upcoming article on Smashing Magazine. So you might want to check that out, but that's the kind of highlight. Soft skills again, Rachel. Yes, we have come full circle. It is by far the most important thing.
Excellent. Well, this is just about the time for us to kind of come full circle, because we have just 2 minutes left until the hour. So maybe just one final question from me to you, Paul. Oh, wow, this is getting very loud over here. And, it's been, we have moved this. Okay, I just need to, I think that there is somebody who is speaking, if I'm not mistaken. We have moved, of course, the Smashing Hour by 1 week, and there was a reason for it. There's still a reason for it. It's really hard times. Actually, if you take something away from this, except from, of course, all the insights that Paul has brought up, we just launched a little campaign, 1.5 days ago, on gathering funds to support Ukraine. So we already sent the first, and I'm very, very proud of this, of this entire community. We already gathered around 4,000 euros, or 3.7 thousand euros, or 4 something dollars. And we just send the money to Ukraine today. So that's really, really great. It shows you that just how incredible the community is. And essentially what we're doing is we're donating all proceeds of the checklist that we released, and also Trina's ethical design handbook. So if you just buy them, you get the books, and of course all the money will be donated. So if you haven't participated, feel free to join in and chip in, and we'll be kind of sending the money almost every 1-2 days at this point. So thank you so much for participating. With this in mind, thank you, Paul, for joining us today, and thanks everyone for joining us as well. I'm looking forward to more sessions, hopefully more peaceful ones. I mean, this one was peaceful, but in more peaceful times.
Oh, it's never peaceful when I'm involved, Vitaly. Let's be honest.
That's okay. You're actually a very nice and kind person, so I don't think that this is an issue. So thanks everyone for joining
noisy then.
Yes, and see you next time around. It's wonderful to have you all here. Have a peaceful rest of the week, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.